millionaire kicks out. Infertile wife for not having children and marries his young pregnant mistress. Years later, he is shocked to see his ex-wife in a restaurant. It was a bright afternoon in the home of Mary and Jacob, a newly married couple who seemed to have the world at their feet. Mary, warm-hearted and kind, moves gently through the elegantly decorated rooms of their house, where every detail reflects Jacob's sophisticated and meticulous taste. In a special corner of the living room hangs a painting by Mary, a landscape of warm tones and free brushstrokes that express her passion for art and her talent for capturing beauty on canvas. Mary fondly remembers the years she spent painting, allowing herself to explore her creativity and express her sensitivity. However, after their marriage, Mary chose to temporarily set aside her art to support Jacob, who is at the peak of his career as an entrepreneur. She takes pride in seeing Jacob climb the corporate ladder, building a solid and respected reputation. In her mind, Jacob's success is their success, an extension of the life they have decided to create together. That night, Mary prepares a special dinner to celebrate Jacob's recent achievement at work. She knows how much this recognition means to him and has gone to great lengths to make the evening intimate and special. The table is adorned with flowers and fine china that Mary reserves for special occasions. When Jacob arrives home, tired but content, he smiles at the effort she has put into the dinner. He sits across from her, and they enjoy a night filled with laughter and knowing glances, toasting to the dreams they share and the future they wish to build together. After dinner, Mary decides to talk to him about something that has been on her mind for the past few months. With a sweet smile and her eyes full of hope, she takes his hand and speaks of her desire to be a mother, to create a family that would give even more meaning to the life they have begun together. Jacob, I know we've been focused on your career and our plans, but I feel it's time to think about having a child. I'm excited to imagine a family, to see a little one with your eyes and your smile running around here, Mary says, gently caressing his hand. Jacob looks at Mary in silence, surprised by the conversation. But inside, a warmth stirs within him that he hasn't felt in a long time. For him, the idea of a family also represents a legacy, something that transcends his work and continues what he has built. With a smile, he squeezes Mary's hand and promises her that they will have a beautiful family together, one that will be the inspiration he needs to move forward. A perfect family, Mary. It will be our motivation, our future, he tells her, kissing her tenderly. Mary feels fulfilled, brimming with hope. That night, she drifts into a peaceful sleep, imagining the life they will have, the games in the garden, the laughter in the house, the walls adorned with her paintings, and their child's first drawings hanging alongside them. The following days unfold in a special harmony for Mary. Every morning, while Jacob leaves early for the office, she dedicates a few hours to her art, slowly rekindling her relationship with the canvas and brushes, inspired by the possibility of the life they wish to build together. In secret, Mary begins to paint a new piece, a portrait symbolizing the love and home they desire. She feels that each brushstroke is a promise and a seed of hope for the future. However, the first shadows start to appear. Despite her enthusiasm, days pass without Mary becoming pregnant. At first, she keeps her spirits high, believing it's just a matter of time. Jacob, in his rare free moments, reassures her that everything will happen at the right time. But Mary notices how his tone grows increasingly brief and distant when the subject comes up. Jacob avoids discussing it in depth, excusing himself with work and the rising responsibilities of his position, which Mary interprets as an act of patience. Still, Mary decides to keep her fears to herself, holding on to the hope and promises they made. When she feels anxious or discouraged, she seeks refuge in painting, convinced that somehow they will manage to create the family she longs for. Mary and Jacob's relationship continues with apparent normalcy. Dinners remain intimate occasions, though Mary begins to perceive a subtle distance in Jacob. He seems more absorbed by work, caught in a constant need to do more and be better. Mary tries to ignore the dark thoughts that creep in, telling herself they are just moments of anxiety and that soon her dreams of having a family will become reality. But deep down, something begins to crack, an imperceptible fissure that, unbeknownst to them, will mark the beginning of a profound change in the life they have planned together. While she holds on to hope for a family, the love that brought them together starts to wobble, threatened by the secrets and frustrations that will soon surface. Mary and Jacob had been trying to have a child for several months. At first, Mary took it calmly, trusting that pregnancy would come in its own time. But with each month that passed without results, anxiety slowly began to creep in. The idea of having a family, of watching a child grow, had become increasingly important to her, a yearning that filled her thoughts at every moment. One morning, after another negative test, Mary decided to talk to Jacob about her concerns. That conversation took place in the kitchen while he hurriedly checked emails on his phone and sipped coffee before heading to the office. With a nervous smile and an emotionally charged look, Mary confessed that she felt something was wrong and that they might need to consider seeing a specialist. Jacob, without looking at her too much, assured her that everything would be fine and that they just needed a little more time. However, Mary sensed a hint of impatience in his tone, which made her feel that her fears weren't really shared. Still, Jacob agreed to accompany her to a fertility clinic. Mary felt a mix of hope and nervousness as they waited in the reception area. The sterile atmosphere of the clinic, with its white walls and cold lights, didn't help calm her anxiety. As he sat next to her, Jacob was busy on his phone, replying to work messages, while Mary sought calm by flipping through magazines on the coffee table, though her mind couldn't focus on anything. All she could think about was what was to come, the possible results of the consultation. Finally, they were called into the office. The doctor, with a kind face but serious eyes, reviewed their tests and studies with an expression that Mary couldn't decipher. She spoke to them about the complexity of the process, the odds, and the possible treatments. Mary listened to every word with a mix of hope and fear, while Jacob occasionally nodded, keeping his eyes fixed on the doctor. However, when he heard that Mary's chances of conceiving were minimal, he felt as if the world was crumbling around him. On the drive home, Mary could barely hold back her tears. She gazed out the car window, trying to process the news, searching for a corner in her mind where it all made sense. Jacob remained silent, one hand on the wheel and his gaze fixed on the road. Mary's hand trembled slightly, wishing he would take it, wishing he would comfort her. But Jacob stayed distant, trapped in his own thoughts. When they finally arrived home, he glanced at her for a moment, muttered that he needed to make some calls, and disappeared into his office, leaving Mary alone with her pain. In the following weeks, Mary tried to cope with the emptiness of that news, balancing hope and resignation. Silently, she began to cling to the idea that there was still a possibility, however small, and she tried to stay strong. But every time she attempted to discuss the issue with Jacob, he would evade her, retreating to excuses about work or changing the subject. His attitude both confused and hurt her. Why did he seem so uncomfortable? Why couldn't they share that pain together? The anguish she now carried in her chest like a constant weight. One night, after a dinner during which they barely exchanged words, Mary gathered her courage and tried to talk to him again. She explained how difficult it was for her to face this alone, how she needed his support, his presence. But Jacob, visibly annoyed and lacking patience, replied that she was obsessing too much, that there were other things in life besides having children, and that they didn't need to complicate matters further. To him, everything was simple and rational, and he seemed incapable of understanding the deep pain Mary felt. That night, Mary went to bed with a heavy heart, feeling a loneliness she had never experienced in her marriage. He had been her refuge, her companion, the man with whom she wanted to share everything, and now she felt that each day he became more distant, more unreachable. sadness became a persistent shadow in her life. And although she tried to stay strong, each new day without Jacob's comfort made that loneliness more unbearable. Seeking an escape, Mary forced herself to return to painting. She picked up her old brushes and canvases, hoping to find some solace in the art she had once loved so much. But when she stood in front of the canvas, sadness paralyzed her. Every time she tried to express her emotions, desolation and emptiness surfaced, as if her pain was too great to capture in a painting. What had once been her passion and form of expression now felt like a reflection of the anguish she was living, a constant struggle between what she wanted to create and what she truly felt. Each night that Jacob came home late from work, each terse and evasive response, each time he pulled away from her thoughts, increased the distance between them. Mary wandered the hallways of the house alone, gazing at the paintings she had created in the early years of their marriage, where her love for Jacob and her hope for the future had been captured in vibrant colors and confident strokes. Now, those paintings seemed foreign, faded, as if they were echoes of a life that no longer belonged to her. The days turned into a succession of uncomfortable silences and moments of solitude. Mary began to feel that her marriage, once a refuge that filled her with hope, was crumbling irreparably. The dream of having a family had transformed into a painful memory, something she could not share with her husband, who now seemed more like a stranger than the man she had married. The idea of rebuilding her life, of finding a purpose beyond the pain, felt like a titanic task she didn't know how to begin. In silence, Mary began to accept that the love that had once united her marriage was no longer enough to bear the weight of her shattered dreams. In the weeks that followed, Mary tried to find some peace in her new reality. Despite the growing distance between her and Jacob, she kept alive the hope that somehow they could overcome this loss together. She still dreamed of the idea of a family, and although every conversation with him on the subject was a closed door, Mary didn't want to give up. Finally, one summer night, she gathered all her courage and decided to talk to him about the possibility of adoption. That evening, after dinner, Mary waited for the right moment. The atmosphere in the living room was calm. The soft light from the lamps filled the space with warmth, reminding her of the early years of their relationship, when every corner of the house felt infused with the love they shared. Mary took a deep breath and, in a soft tone but filled with expectation, addressed him. "Jacob, I've been thinking a lot about this. I know the process has been difficult for both of us, but what do you think about adoption? Maybe we could form a family that way." Jacob looked up from his phone, not hiding the look of disgust on his face. His eyes, which had once been warm and full of affection toward her, now reflected a hardness Mary didn't recognize. For a few seconds, he said nothing, just stared at her with a mix of impatience and coldness, as if the idea she had just proposed was an offense. "Adopt," he finally repeated, his tone dry and distant. "Mary, if I'm going to have kids, I want them to be mine, of my own blood. I don't see the point in adopting a child who doesn't carry my last name, my genes. That would be absurd." Jacob's words hit her like a slap. Mary felt pain spread through her chest, a hurt that stemmed not just from his words, but from the contempt implicit in his tone. She had believed that despite the difficulties, they still shared a bond, a life together. But in that moment, she realized that her pain and desires meant nothing to him. It was as if, all of a sudden, their entire relationship had been reduced to her ability to conceive a biological child. "Jacob," she murmured, trying to find words amid the mix of sadness and confusion she felt. "It's not just about blood. It's about love, about giving a child a chance, about building together the family we always wanted." But Jacob seemed unmoved. With a coldness that chilled her soul, he turned away and focused back on his phone, closing the topic with a single phrase. "I'm not interested in raising a child who isn't mine, Mary. If it's so important to you, maybe you should reconsider your priorities." With that response, Jacob got up and left the room, leaving her alone in a sadness she hadn't felt until that moment. Jacob's reaction revealed something dark to her, something Mary hadn't wanted to admit. To him, she was nothing more than a means to reach an ideal, another trophy in his perfect life. The vision he had of her and their relationship was conditioned by her ability to fulfill that expectation of having a biological family. That night, Mary cried silently, wondering when they had lost that deep connection she thought they had. Everything seemed so superficial and empty, and every word from Jacob echoed in her mind like a sentence. If it's so important to you, maybe you should reconsider your priorities. In the following days, Mary tried to find comfort in her own activities. She knew that Jacob was increasingly immersed in work, arriving home late every night, and when he was home, they barely exchanged a few words. Mary tried to reignite the spark in her life by returning to painting, but every time she sat in front of the canvas, pain and emptiness paralyzed her. The joy she once felt in creating had vanished, replaced by an uncontrollable sadness that seemed to have contaminated everything she loved. Soon, her attempts to connect with Jacob became futile. It was no longer just the coldness or distance, it was the absolute indifference with which he treated her. Mary began to spend more time alone at home, surrounded by her memories, clinging to the few happy moments she still held in her memory, as if those fragments of happiness could somehow heal her present. However, with each passing day, the pain deepened, and the home that had once been her refuge turned into a place filled with shadows and solitude. One night, after another failed attempt to talk to him about their relationship, Mary realized she could no longer pretend that everything was okay. The love and understanding that had once bound them had faded, leaving only an empty shell of what their marriage had been. The distance she felt was so great that even when they were in the same room, Jacob felt like a stranger to her, someone who shared her space but not her life. Mary began to notice small details reflecting the change in Jacob. Long nights at the office became more frequent, and he started to pay less attention to household matters. His excuses for being late no longer sounded genuine. Sometimes he didn't even bother to give them. The coldness he showed her made her feel increasingly insecure and alone. Despite everything, Mary tried to ignore the signs. Perhaps, she told herself, Jacob was going through a personal crisis, a moment of tension in his professional life, and needed time to find his own balance. Maybe, in some way, their relationship could still recover. But deep down, she knew something else was happening, something she didn't want to admit. With every distant gesture, with every night spent alone in the silence of her home, Mary understood that the love they once shared was fading, that the distance between them had become an almost insurmountable chasm. One night, after a long day of solitude, Mary made her way to the bedroom with a mix of sadness and resignation. As she walked down the hall, she caught a glimpse of the paintings she had created in the early years of their marriage. Each image, every brushstroke, reminded her of the excitement and happiness she had felt at the beginning, when she dreamed of a shared life full of love. Now, those paintings seemed to reflect only the echo of a broken hope, a dream that had gradually turned to ashes. Upon entering the bedroom, Mary looked at the empty bed and sighed. She lay down silently, hugging the pillow in an attempt to find comfort as sadness enveloped her. With tears in her eyes, she remembered the promises they had once made, the plans for a family, the laughter and dreams that seemed so real. Now, everything felt like it had vanished, and the sensation of loss was so overwhelming that she could barely breathe. In that darkness, Mary realized something deep and painful. The man she had once loved was no longer by her side. What had once been a love filled with promises and dreams had become a lonely burden, a cold and hopeless reality. The home they had built together had transformed into a silent prison, where the memories of what once was only served to remind her of what would never be again. With that revelation, Mary closed her eyes, letting the tears flow freely. Jacob's late nights at work had become almost a constant in their lives. He spent more and more time away from home, immersed in meetings, company events, and business dinners that, at least in his perception, offered him the energy and validation he needed. That particular night, a gala dinner organized by the company seemed to provide an opportunity for him to disconnect from the problems he was so desperately avoiding at home. He dressed meticulously, his suit impeccable, and left the house without hardly saying goodbye to Mary, who was left alone once more, watching his figure fade away at the threshold. The gala was in full swing when Jacob arrived. The room sparkled with dim lights, guests mingled amidst laughter and lively conversations, and the atmosphere was infused with a vitality that Jacob felt he had lost long ago. With a glass of wine in hand, he navigated through the crowd, greeting acquaintances until his eyes met those of Camilla. Camilla was a young woman with a captivating smile and an undeniable energy that radiated from her every word and gesture. She worked in the marketing department and had become a constant presence in the company meetings over the past few weeks. Jacob was intrigued by her freshness, the way her laughter lit up the room, and especially the genuine admiration she showed for his work. That night, Camilla was radiant. Upon seeing him, she approached with a smile. "Jacob, I didn't expect to see you here so soon. How are you?" she asked, looking at him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Jacob, surprised by her proximity, felt a slight dizziness. His attention, usually scattered and focused on 1,000 things at once, zeroed in on her. The conversation flowed naturally, and soon they found themselves talking not only about work, but also about their interests, dreams, and what success meant to each of them. Camilla listened attentively, something Jacob hadn't experienced in a long time. In her presence, he felt understood, valued, and filled with an energy he thought he had lost. Hours passed quickly. At some point, amid laughter and shared glances, Camilla lightly touched his arm while they spoke. Jacob felt the touch like a jolt, a reminder of something he had been subconsciously seeking: connection, recognition, something that had vanished from his relationship with Mary. With every gesture from Camilla, every shared laugh, he became convinced that this moment was a breath of fresh air from his real life, an escape from the exhausting routine and the emptiness he felt at home. The gala continued, but in a corner of the room, away from the noise, Jacob and Camilla seemed to inhabit their own world. The complicity transformed into a physical and emotional closeness, into an intimacy neither of them had initially intended. Amid laughter and whispered words, Camilla looked at him in a way Jacob couldn't ignore. It was a silent invitation, a crossing of lines he had long imagined, but had been too afraid to step across. However, that night, the barrier between fantasy and reality faded. It was a fleeting moment, an instant that changed everything between them. Camilla, with her seductive smile and confidence, seemed to offer him a kind of salvation, a reminder that he could still feel something intense, something that could pull him away from the emptiness. From that night on, Jacob knew he had crossed a line from which there was no return. In the following weeks, the relationship between Jacob and Camilla ceased to be merely professional. Lunches and meetings they shared turned into private encounters, excuses to spend more time together. Camilla's presence was an escape from reality, a refuge where Jacob could feel desired and admired. In his mind, he justified his actions, convincing himself that he too deserved happiness, that what he was doing was a way to fill the voids that Mary could not. At the same time, the distance with Mary became an unbridgeable abyss. If before Jacob had been cold and distant, now he barely spoke to his wife. The few conversations they had were brief, almost monotonous, and filled with uncomfortable silences. Mary, although aware of the growing coldness, tried not to confront that silent truth. She convinced herself that Jacob was merely going through a tough phase, that perhaps the burdens of work had consumed him. However, each night he came home late, each time he found an excuse not to be there, doubt grew within her, transforming into a silent certainty she could not ignore. One night, Mary decided to stay awake waiting for him. Sitting on the living room sofa, she hugged herself, trying to calm the mix of anguish and anxiety that engulfed her. She knew there was something Jacob wasn't telling her, a truth that lay between them, and that, no matter how much she tried to ignore it, was as tangible as the silence that now reigned in their home. Minutes turned into hours, and when Jacob finally came home, the silence was absolute. He was surprised to see her there, sitting in the dim light, her eyes heavy with sadness and something he hadn't expected: courage. Mary didn't need words to convey that she knew, that she had felt every absence, every distance he had imposed between them. Although she didn't dare to confront him directly, deep down, Mary understood that something had broken irrevocably. Jacob's betrayal, though unspoken, was something she had already sensed. From that night on, Mary began to isolate herself further in her pain, clinging to memories of what her marriage had once been, to the happiness they had once shared. Meanwhile, Jacob, immersed in his relationship with Camilla, barely noticed the devastation he had left behind. The house that had once been a warm and welcoming home was now a cold and desolate place, filled with memories Mary couldn't escape, but that filled her with deep, heartbreaking sadness. With each new excuse, with each implicit lie, Mary convinced herself that she had lost him. She knew that the person who had once been her husband had changed, that he was no longer the man with whom she had dreamed of having a family. The distance between them was a barrier she couldn't cross, and the certainty that Jacob shared his most intimate moments with someone else devastated her. Jacob, trapped in the illusion of a renewed life with Camilla, hardly noticed Mary's pain. He had sunk into a bubble where only his own needs and desires existed, convinced that his pursuit of happiness was valid, even if it meant leaving Mary behind. Each time he returned home, he found a space filled with silence that he preferred to ignore, an emotional absence he had chosen not to face. That night, in the darkness of her bedroom, Mary realized that the bond that tied them together was broken in a way that perhaps could never be repaired. The certainty of Jacob's betrayal became an unbearable burden for Mary. Though each night she tried to convince herself that they could still find a way out, reality hit her hard every time she saw him walk through the door without barely looking at her, every time he averted his gaze, as if her presence were more of a nuisance than a comfort. Mary clung to the memories of the good times, but she knew that as the days passed, the love and respect they had once shared were fading irretrievably. One night, Mary decided to confront the situation once and for all. She had reached a point where she could no longer endure Jacob's silence and coldness, nor could she pretend that what they had could be salvaged with a simple conversation. She waited late into the evening in the living room, sitting in the armchair, her heart racing and her breath held. The clock struck 11 when she finally heard the sound of the door. Jacob entered without paying her much attention, as if he didn't notice her presence in the living room. Hearing his footsteps, Mary felt a mix of anxiety and determination. When he saw her sitting there, she looked at him with an expression of sadness, but also of bravery. The silence was almost palpable as they locked eyes, and in the dim light of the living room, Mary felt that she finally needed to give voice to everything she had kept silent. "Jacob," she began, her voice firm even though her heart raced, "I want you to be honest with me. I know there's something you're not telling me, and I need to know the truth." He stopped, visibly surprised, as if he hadn't expected Mary to confront him in that way. Jacob let out a sigh, and for a few seconds, the silence became so dense that it felt like they were both sinking into it. Mary did not look away. She did not back down, determined to hear what he had to say, even if the answer hurt her. "Is there another woman in your life?" she finally asked, her calm hiding the whirlwind of emotions consuming her inside. Jacob, trapped and with no way out, looked away, avoiding her eyes. There was no way to evade the truth. For the first time in a long while, he felt exposed, vulnerable, unable to pretend that everything was fine. Finally, with coldness and without any sign of compassion, Jacob slowly nodded, as if the weight of his confession was nothing more than an uncomfortable formality. "Yes, Mary," he said, his tone direct and dry. "I'm with someone else, and she's expecting my child." Mary felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. Those words were a blow she never imagined receiving from the man who had been her life partner. But Jacob wasn't finished. With an attitude that left her speechless, he continued, as if he wanted to close that chapter of his life without looking back. "She can give me what you couldn't, Mary. For me, this means having a family, continuing my legacy, something that you couldn't do," he added, with a harshness Mary didn't recognize, a hardness that revealed a part of him that had remained hidden until that moment. Jacob's words were so cruel that Mary felt as if her chest were shattering into 1,000 pieces. Tears began to stream down her face, but she didn't move. She didn't look away. Though her heart was broken, she forced herself to stay strong. With a choked voice, she tried to appeal to the years they had shared, to the moments when they had been happy. "Jacob," she murmured, trying to find something in his gaze, any sign of remorse or compassion. "Please, think about what we've lived together. This can't be the end. Give me a chance." But Jacob did not seem moved. The coldness in his face was almost inhuman. Far from showing any hint of remorse, he looked at her with a mix of disdain and annoyance, as if her words were a nuisance he was no longer willing to tolerate. For him, the decision was made. The Mary he once loved was now just an obstacle in his new life. "There's nothing to save, Mary," he declared harshly. "I want you to leave. I'll give you a few days to pack your things. There's nothing left between us worth rescuing." The devastation on Mary's face was evident, but Jacob didn't glance back. He turned and walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room, with the echo of his words resonating in the emptiness of the house. Mary stood there, motionless, absorbing the weight of the betrayal, the coldness and indifference with which he had treated her. She had not only lost the man she loved, she had lost the life they built together, the hopes, the dreams of a family. In the following days, Mary began to pack her belongings in silence. She roamed every corner of the house that had once been her home, feeling as though she were bidding farewell to a life that no longer belonged to her. Every object, every photograph, every piece of furniture reminded her of the happiness they had once shared, the years of love that now seemed distant and unreal. Tears were a constant companion as she touched the paintings that hung on the walls, the works she had once created with love, now appearing faded, as empty as her soul felt. One afternoon, while she was gathering her things, her sister Sophia arrived to help her. Mary, emotionally exhausted, fell into her sister's arms as soon as she saw her. Sophia's embrace was a comfort amid the storm. Her sister understood that what Mary was losing went beyond a marriage. It was a part of her life, of her identity, of her hope. "You're not alone, Isa," Sophia whispered, tenderly stroking her hair. "We'll get through this together. You're going to rebuild your life." With patience and love, Sophia helped her pack, giving Mary the support she so desperately needed. In silence, they filled boxes with memories, with pieces of a life Mary was leaving behind. When everything was ready, they headed to Sophia's house, where Mary found a temporary refuge in which she would try, step by step, to rebuild her world. During the first few weeks in her sister's apartment, Mary felt as if pain was consuming her entirely. Every thought, every memory was a reminder of Jacob's betrayal, of the cruel words he had thrown at her mercilessly. The nights were endless, and in the silence of the early morning, tears flowed without consolation. She felt broken, stripped of everything she had once valued, and although Sophia was by her side, Mary didn't know how to find the strength to move forward. However, with time, and through her sister's constant love, Mary began to discover a small spark of hope within her. In her moments of greatest despair, Sophia's words comforted her, reminding her that although her marriage had ended, her life still had a path to follow. Gradually, Mary started to accept the idea that her past with Jacob was a closed chapter and that she needed to find a new way to heal and rebuild her identity. But the pain of betrayal, the injustice of being displaced, of being judged for something that had never been in her hands, lingered on, latent. And though Mary didn't know it at the time, that pain would be the beginning of a transformative process that would lead her to discover a strength she never imagined she had. The time spent in Sophia's apartment was a mix of comfort and sadness for Mary. She appreciated her sister's company, the tenderness with which she cared for her, and the quiet refuge that space provided. Yet, despite Sophia's affection and support, Mary felt that the pain from Jacob's betrayal had left her empty. Each morning she awoke with a sense of loss weighing on her chest, and each night she closed her eyes to memories that seemed to have become shadows of an irretrievable past. One afternoon, while Sophia prepared tea, she suggested something Mary hadn't expected. "Isa, why don't you try painting again?" she said with a gentle smile, as if offering a little piece of hope. "I remember how your eyes would light up every time you talked about art. Maybe that could help you heal, to find a way out of all this pain." Mary hesitated, feeling that her life had lost its colors, that the sadness she carried inside couldn't be captured on any canvas. However, after pondering for several days, she decided to give her sister's suggestion a chance. There was a community art center in Sophia's neighborhood, a small and warm space that offered painting classes and artistic activities for the community. A modest place, filled with works of all styles and colors, where Mary felt a mix of nostalgia and relief at seeing those brushes and canvases. The first time she entered the art room, she felt a pang of pain as memories of her days as a painter flooded back to her, when creating was an extension of her happiness. Now, she felt that art was the only refuge left to pour out the emotions she carried inside. She took the brushes with trembling hands and began to paint, though each stroke was an effort, a reminder of her pain. The first pieces she created were reflections of her suffering, filled with dark strokes and muted colors, but in each of those canvases, she found a subtle relief, as if the pain she had held for so long began to dissipate little by little. As Mary attended the center, she was offered the chance to teach painting to children, something she accepted with a mix of nerves and hope. At first, she felt insecure, but soon discovered that the company of the children was an unexpected joy. Each class became a space of healing, a place where Mary could share her love for art while finding the peace she so desperately needed. The children, with their energy and laughter, reminded her of the beauty of simple things, the purity of creating without fear or judgment. It was in one of those classes that Mary met Diego and his son Luke. Diego was a calm-looking man, with a kind gaze who always accompanied his son to painting classes. Luke, an 8-year-old boy with a thoughtful and reserved expression, initially appeared shy, observing everything around him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Mary noticed that there was something in Luke's way of looking that reflected a special sensitivity, a perception of the world that seemed advanced for his age. Little by little, Mary gained Luke's trust. In one of the classes, she asked the children to paint something that made them happy. While the other children filled their pages with colors and abstract shapes, Luke drew a scene that moved Mary. It was an image of a family, a man and a woman standing together with a child between them. In one corner of the drawing, Luke had added a figure that, though small, radiated warmth. It was Mary, whom he had depicted as a close and welcoming presence. Mary looked at the drawing with a mix of surprise and emotion. She hadn't expected that this child, with whom she had shared only a few days, would integrate her into his world in such a significant way. Upon seeing the drawing, Diego appeared visibly moved and grateful. After class, he approached Mary to thank her. "Luke has been through a lot," Diego explained, his voice heavy with sincerity. "Since we lost his mother, it's been hard for him to express himself, and seeing you here, helping him find a space to create, has been a gift for both of us." Mary felt an immediate connection with Diego and Luke, a type of bond she never thought she could experience after losing her own family. Over time, Mary and Diego began to spend time together outside of class, initially discussing art and the children, sharing laughter and confidences that built mutual trust. Little by little, they opened up to each other, sharing the scars of their own lives. Diego told her how the death of his wife had left a void in his life and the fear of raising Luke without the maternal figure he desperately needed. Mary, in turn, shared her story, her separation, and the deep pain she had felt from losing not only her marriage, but the possibility of having the family she had always dreamed of. They both found in each other an unexpected support, a refuge where they could heal and build something new, free from judgment or expectations. Each encounter strengthened the bond they shared, and slowly, Mary began to experience renewed joy. Luke became a source of light in her life, and every time the boy ran toward her with a smile or showed her a drawing, Mary felt her heart fill with something she had thought was lost. That family she had once imagined seemed to be taking shape in a different but equally beautiful way. The affection between Mary and Diego transformed into something deeper. During their walks after classes, they shared their dreams, fears, and desires for a peaceful life. Mary realized that in Diego, she had found something she had never had with Jacob, a connection based on understanding and mutual respect. Diego looked at her with a tenderness that made her feel valued, as if her pain and scars were parts of her that he accepted and loved. One day, while they strolled through a nearby park after a class, Diego gently took Mary's hand. It was a simple gesture, but for both of them, it meant the world. Mary felt that the love she had always wanted, the affection and stability she sought in a family, was now within her reach. Life was offering her a second chance, an opportunity to build a home with someone who accepted her as she was, with all her experiences and pains. That night, as she prepared for bed, Mary realized that something had changed within her. The pain was still there, the scars still marked her soul, but there was also a glimmer of hope, a possibility of being happy in a new way. With Diego and Luke, she felt she was building a family based on true love, understanding, a desire to heal together, and respect for what each had lived. For the first time in a long time, Mary allowed herself to dream of a different future, a future in which the past would not define her happiness. With Diego and Luke by her side, she began to see her life as a blank canvas, where each new day was an opportunity to reconstruct what she had lost and discover a happiness she thought was unattainable. Hope was reborn in Mary's heart, and with it, the desire to embrace the life in front of her, filled with possibilities and love. The days spent alongside Diego and Luke were like a healing balm for Mary. The sadness she had once felt seemed to dissipate every time she shared an afternoon of laughter at the park or took a walk with Diego, holding her hand gently. With them, her life began to fill with small moments of happiness, instances where she could trust in the future again without fear. By their side, Mary felt she was discovering a type of peace she never imagined possible after everything she had lived. She had found, without looking for it, a new family woven with love, respect, and a mutual understanding that filled her with an inexplicable warmth. One day, while cleaning the small studio that Sophia had prepared for her to paint in, Mary began to notice a slight dizziness. She thought it was accumulated fatigue, perhaps a reaction to the emotional changes she had experienced, and decided to sit for a moment. However, the dizziness and nausea began to occur more frequently, a feeling of discomfort that accompanied her throughout the day, especially in the mornings. Mary tried to ignore it, attributing it to the stress of recent months, the emotional baggage that still weighed on her. But when the discomfort became constant, she decided to consult her doctor. Fear and anxiety swirled in her mind as she awaited the results in the office. The mere thought that something might be wrong after finally finding some peace filled her with anguish. Finally, the doctor returned to the office with a smile on his face, a kind expression that caught Mary off guard. "Mary," he began, with a soft and reassuring tone. "What you're experiencing is normal. These are the early symptoms of a pregnancy." Mary was silent, completely stunned, trying to process what she had just heard. The doctor continued speaking, explaining the precautions she should take, but his words faded into a distant murmur. A pregnancy. That which she had desired for so many years, and which, in her marriage to Jacob, had never materialized. A mix of emotions overwhelmed her: surprise, disbelief, joy, and at the same time, a deep fear, as if this were some kind of mistake or illusion that could vanish at any moment. When she left the office, Mary felt overwhelmed. She wandered aimlessly through the streets for a while, trying to calm her breathing and organize her thoughts. This news changed everything in a way she didn't know if she was prepared to face. After some time, she decided to see Diego. She needed to tell him, to share with him this surprise that overwhelmed her, and that, in some way, belonged to both of them. Diego was at the park with Luke when she arrived. Mary approached with hesitant steps, her face reflecting a mix of emotion and nervousness. Diego immediately noticed something was wrong, and as he looked into her eyes, he moved closer, taking her hands gently. "Mary, what's wrong?" he asked, concerned, while he gently stroked her fingers. Mary looked at him with tears in her eyes, a trembling smile on her lips, and finally found the words. I'm pregnant, Diego," she whispered, barely believing what she was saying. Diego looked at her with a mixture of surprise and joy on his face. For a few seconds, they remained silent, processing the news. Then Diego hugged her tightly, his arms surrounding her in a gesture that conveyed both support and love. Mary felt a wave of emotions envelop her, an unexpected peace that she could only find in his arms. Luke, who was watching from nearby, looked at his father and Mary with curiosity and joy, not fully understanding the moment, but sensing that something important had happened. That day marked a turning point in Mary's life. As she returned home with Diego, they talked extensively about the future that lay ahead of them, about the family they were forming, and how this new baby would change their lives forever. Mary felt a mix of joy and vertigo. For years, she had accepted the idea that motherhood would not be possible for her, and now, in an unexpected twist of fate, that possibility was being reborn, opening up a world of emotions that she could barely comprehend. However, as the days passed, that initial joy began to mingle with a series of questions and doubts. Mary recalled the years of pain and frustration in her marriage to Jacob, all those diagnoses and treatments that had convinced her that she could never be a mother. The idea that perhaps her infertility wasn't real, that maybe Jacob was the one with the issue, began to gain strength in her mind, generating a mix of relief and bitterness. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty, Mary decided to undergo additional tests. She needed to understand how it was possible that she was pregnant now, when for years she had been told her body could not conceive. After several tests and consultations, the doctors gave her an answer that left her breathless. "You have no fertility issues," the doctor explained with a compassionate expression. "In fact, it seems that you never had difficulties conceiving. Sometimes, in these cases, it can be that one of the partners has issues. Perhaps your ex-husband Jacob had some problem." Mary listened to those words in silence, feeling a mix of disbelief and sadness. The years of suffering, of feeling inadequate, of enduring Jacob's indifference and cruelty, now seemed so unjust, so unnecessary. All the pain and tears she had shed, all the moments she had blamed herself, were the product of a lie, a distortion that should never have been her burden. Mary felt a sudden release, as if by knowing that truth, she could finally let go of the guilt she had carried for so long. However, Mary couldn't shake a twinge of bitterness. The image of Jacob, his harshness, and the coldness with which he had blamed her for not being able to conceive, still echoed in her memory. But now, alongside Diego, with the baby they were expecting, Mary realized she didn't want to allow the past to define her future. She decided that she would not live anchored in resentment, that her life, her family, would not be marked by the pain left by Jacob, but by the love she had found with Diego. With that resolution, Mary began to embrace her new life with a sense of gratitude and peace. Each day spent with Diego and Luke made her feel more whole, more certain that she was where she was meant to be. The months passed, and the relationship between them strengthened further, forming a family unit that provided her with a sense of belonging and security she had never experienced. Diego was a loving, patient, and protective man, accompanying her every step of her pregnancy, ensuring she lacked for nothing and constantly reminding her of how important she was to him. Luke, who eagerly awaited the arrival of his little brother, began expressing his joy through drawings and letters he made for the baby, decorating the house with his creations filled with love and color. Mary saw in those gestures the reflection of the family she had always dreamed of, a family built on acceptance, love, and mutual respect. As Mary prepared to welcome the baby, she also resumed her art classes, this time with a renewed perspective. Now her works had a different light, a brightness that reflected her healing process and her path toward a new life. In every stroke, in every color, Mary captured the strength she had found within herself, the resilience of having reborn after so much pain. One afternoon, while painting in the studio, Diego entered and stood silently watching her. Mary looked up and smiled at him, and he approached tenderly, caressing her belly and feeling the baby's movements. "You have no idea how grateful I am that you are in my life," Diego whispered, his gaze filled with love. "You are the best thing that has happened to us, to me and Luke." Mary, moved, took his hand and squeezed it gently. She felt that her life had taken an unexpected turn, that true love and the peace she had long sought were finally within her grasp. With Diego and Luke and the baby on the way, Mary knew that her past was behind her. She had overcome the pain, found the courage to start anew, and was now ready to embrace a life full of love and fulfilled promises. In that stillness, feeling Diego's warm presence and the gentle movement of the baby, Mary knew she had found her home. A home built on true love, a love that embraced her with all her wounds and scars, and that, unlike everything she had lived before, was meant to last. Years later, Mary's life had blossomed in a direction she never imagined. Her relationship with Diego had become a refuge where each day she found love, support, and the peace she had longed for. Now married and living together, they shared a life filled with harmony and the little moments Mary had always dreamed of. Alongside Luke, who had grown up happy and full of enthusiasm, and their little son, their home was the epicenter of laughter, games, and a sincere love that reminded Mary daily that the pain of the past was behind her. Motherhood brought Mary indescribable joy. From the first moment she held her baby in her arms, she felt that the last corner of her heart, the one that still held the wounds of the past, had healed completely. Diego, who was a loving and patient father, supported her every step of the way, sharing in the parenting journey and enjoying the family life they had built together. Luke, with the protective spirit of an older brother, helped care for the baby with a tenderness that filled Mary with pride. In many ways, her life was perfect, more than she had ever dared to imagine. Meanwhile, Mary had rekindled her love for art, this time with renewed strength. Her paintings reflected the journey she had traveled, the pain and the healing, the hope and the rebirth. Her passion for art led her to organize an exhibition at a local gallery where she showcased her most recent works, inspired by the love she now experienced and the healing process that had transformed her. Each painting told a part of her story, and every stroke represented an emotion she had learned to embrace. On the night of the exhibition, the gallery was filled with visitors and curious onlookers admiring her works, while Mary, radiant and happy, welcomed them alongside Diego and their children. For her, this exhibition was not just a display of her art, but a testament to her strength, to her ability to rebuild and find peace after pain. Attendees admired her paintings, some commenting on the depth of her strokes and the vibrant colors that reflected a journey of emotions. Mary watched her family among the crowd, and each time her eyes met Diego's, he returned her gaze with a warm and proud smile. What Mary didn't know was that, in a corner of the gallery, someone was watching from a distance, too afraid to come too close. Jacob had heard about Mary's exhibition and, on an impulse, decided to attend silently, hoping to see what she had achieved. His life, in contrast, had taken an unexpected turn. Camilla, after the revelation about the paternity of Nicholas, had left him, taking the child and leaving him alone in the mansion they once shared. In that home, filled with empty memories and unfulfilled promises, Jacob lived a solitude that consumed him day by day. Over time, Jacob had been forced to face the consequences of his decisions. The mansion that had once symbolized his success now felt desolate and cold, a constant reminder of what he had lost due to his pride and ambitions. Days had turned monotonous, a meaningless routine that even professional success could not fill. Finally, in a desperate attempt to find some purpose, he decided to create a foundation dedicated to helping vulnerable children, an act of redemption that, while not repairing the damage he caused, offered him some peace. But none of that eased the weight of regret he carried in his soul. Years after losing Mary, he understood that she was the only person who truly loved him, who offered him a home, a life filled with love and meaning. Now, seeing her in the gallery, surrounded by people who admired her, with a family supporting her and a sincere love reflected in every look from Diego, Jacob felt the weight of deep sadness, of a loss he could never reclaim. He watched Mary from a distance, not daring to approach, as she moved with a serenity and happiness he had never seen. The Mary before him was a fulfilled, strong and confident woman, someone who had found her purpose and built an authentic and happy life. In silence, Jacob understood that there was nothing he could do to change the past, and that any attempt to approach her would only serve as a reminder of the wounds he had inflicted. Finally, Mary noticed him. Their eyes briefly met, and Jacob, feeling the weight of his mistakes, nodded slightly, as if silently asking for forgiveness. Mary looked at him for a few seconds, and although her expression was calm, her gaze reflected the acceptance of a closed chapter. With a gentle gesture, she returned a slight smile of courtesy, a silent goodbye that conveyed both forgiveness and the confirmation that her life had moved on. Jacob felt it was his cue to leave. Silently, he exited the gallery, aware that he had lost the only person who truly mattered to him. His life, filled with material successes, lacked the love and meaning it once had with Mary. As he crossed the threshold, he understood that she had found the happiness he denied her, that her family and peace were in a place where he no longer belonged. As Jacob walked away, Mary turned her attention back to her family, to the love surrounding her, and knew she had closed the last chapter of her past. Diego, having noticed that brief exchange of glances, gently squeezed her hand, reminding her that he was by her side, supporting her every step of the way. Mary, grateful, looked at Diego and her children, feeling that, at last, her life was complete. The night continued in the gallery, laughter and conversations filling the space as Mary shared her story through her works. Each painting was a reflection of her journey, a reminder that pain and rebirth could coexist and give rise to something beautiful. The attendees congratulated her, admiring her talent and the story of overcoming that each piece reflected. Mary felt fulfilled, surrounded by people who valued her, and above all, enveloped in a family she had built from love and understanding. When it was time to head home, Mary, Diego, Luke, and their little son walked together to the car. Luke, excited, talked about the paintings he liked the most, while Diego smiled, listening to his son's exuberance. Mary looked around, observing her family with a mix of gratitude and peace, aware that she had found the happiness she had always sought. The night was cool and tranquil, and in the silence of the journey back, Mary felt that for the first time in her life, she was where she had always wanted to be. Back at home, as everyone prepared for bed, Mary lingered for a moment in the studio, contemplating the blank canvas before her. It was her next project, a new work in which she wanted to capture not only her story, but also the peace and love she now felt in every fiber of her being. As she held the brush in her hands, Mary realized that life had given her a second chance, that her family, her art, and the love she had found were the most precious gifts she could have received. That night, as she lay down beside Diego, surrounded by the cozy silence of their home, Mary closed her eyes and smiled. She felt that at last she was at peace with her past, that every decision and every tear had led her to this moment of fulfillment. The home she had dreamed of, that space filled with love, laughter, and respect, was right there beside her, and she knew that despite all the wounds and scars, she had been reborn, had found her true essence, and had created the life she had always desired. Mary slept that night with a calm heart, knowing that her story was complete, that she had found true love, and that despite the obstacles, she had triumphed on the path to happiness. The camera, in that final shot, slowly pulled away from her home, showing a picture of a fulfilled life and the peace of a woman who, after much pain, had discovered the power to heal and to love fully. And so we come to the end of this thrilling story. Thank you for joining us on this journey filled with emotions, transformation, and second chances. Mary's story reminds us that although we face difficult moments and painful losses, there is always the possibility to be reborn, to find peace, and to discover true love. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Every week we share tales filled with inspiration, love, and resilience to remind us that we can all find a new beginning. Don't forget to like and share this video with those you think might need a little hope. We would love to hear in the comments what parts of the story moved you the most, or what lessons you take with you. Thank you for being here and being part of this community. We'll see you in the next video. Until next time, may you always find the courage to keep moving forward.